Since the discovery of penicillin around 90 years ago, antibiotics have saved millions of lives around the world. The challenge we face now is the rise of the superbug. Bacteria have smartened up and they've developed resistance. They've adapted. But here at the Westmead Institute, Professor Jonathan Iredell is looking at a new technique using viruses or phages to help eradicate dangerous bacteria. It's nature's own cure.
You could treat an infection that would otherwise, deal with childhood mortality, for example, from simple ear infections and simple pneumonias with penicillin. So it really transformed that. And it really made modern hospitals feasible because clearly we couldn't do all the big surgical, intensive care, transplantation stuff without effective antibiotics. And that's, I guess, a lot of people when they talk about antimicrobial resistance talk about the threat to the health system because all of our cancer therapy, transplant therapy, critical cares, emergency departments would just keel over if we didn't have effective antimicrobials. It's probably really only been the last 20 years or so that we've started to see our normal hospital antibiotics being defeated. So in a place like Australia now, you can expect that someone who comes into hospital with, say, a urinary tract infection, about 1 in 10 of them will have a bug that won't respond to our normal hospital antibiotics. So that's a new thing. And that's really only been in the last decade or two. And now in a country like India, where antibiotic resistance is really extreme, it's more like 2/3 of infections that present to a place, a hospital with severe sepsis, will defeat your normal antibiotics. So that if you have a bone marrow transplant in a place like Delhi, as opposed to a place where antibiotic resistance is really low, then the threat is actually more from the infection that comes when your immune system goes down than it is from the cancer itself, which has got high cure rates now. So it really has become a principal threat, and so WHO has famously recognised this as a threat to global health and security.
We're seeing a real global pattern of resistance to antibiotics.
Yeah, so everything's connected, the relationship between agriculture, the soils, the water, the birds that fossick around human habitation and then visit the beach, the food chain animals, pets, and of course transfer between humans themselves, the globalisation, means that essentially an antibiotic resistance that develops in one country is very quickly spread to everywhere else in the world, to the extent that you'll find antibiotic resistance in Antarctic penguins now. Rather than try and ablate bacteria, rather try and manipulate the environment. If we live in a perfectly healthy environment, then the bacteria in us and around us promote our own health. So how can we go about developing an environment in and around us, in a hospital and in ourselves, that's actually healthy and promotes our own well-being? And the answer to that is essentially to try and recognise and remove those things that are opportunistically invaders, so pathogens that have developed that are just good at damaging humans to their own ends and are not originally part of the natural environment. And amongst those, and even amongst ordinary bacteria, things that no longer respond to antibiotics, so that when they do invade our bloodstream because we have some catastrophe, surgical catastrophe or something, that we can actually treat them with ordinary antibiotics. And to do that, it means that the modern sort of tools that we've now become used to, the genomic and genetic tools we have now available, can be brought to bear on this, and increasingly the case, certainly in countries like Australia, where we interrogate the contents of your environment and yourself in terms of your bacteria to know whether there's any such threats, and if there are such threats, to try and eliminate them.